welcome back to another series of jPlay. As I already announced that my next playthrough that I'm about to start today is about this brand or relatively new game, Bora Bora. You might know this guy, Stefan Feld. Again, Ravensburger was kind enough to provide me this example here for Bora Bora, so I'm really looking forward to playing this. Today I more or less give you some introduction to some of the core rules. I really don't want to go into much detail here, and additionally I will want to show you the basic setup of a game of Bora Bora. I have decided to go for a two-player game because the rules in comparison to a 3 or 4-player game are not that different. It only comes to them reduced action cards, but I come to that in a second. And it's still a little bit faster than, of course, than a full 4-player game. I think this should be sufficient to give you some idea of how Bora Bora actually works. So this is the player board for the red player, and I already prepared a little bit. So for once I have placed all the building tiles on his appropriate slot. I had made one mistake, and I don't know how that came, but as you might see, this player board is blue, and of course it would be the player board for the blue player. There's already also one for a real red player, but I was completely through before I noticed, so I hope you can excuse that. I already placed all the huts here, so they're important for when you are going to expand your tribe, basically. Each player starts with 4 of these priests here. Each player draws 2 of these gods cards, and I have a yellow and a red god. I also explain that later. Each player gets 1 light green, so the crane symbol here, task tile, and 2 dark green. So these are the task tiles this player has to fulfill, but they are more or less renewed every round, basically. But I will explain that also later. Then each player gets 3 of these dice, so these are his action dice. I will explain that also in a second. Each player starts with 2 of these offerings. They are or will be used for using the god cards later on, and each player starts with this, I think it's a main god token over there, and that's more or less it. Maybe one thing I should explain is I draw randomly the first player order, so the red player is the first player in this first round at least, whereas the other player, being the green one, will go second. This is now the starting setup for the green player. Basically everything is the same, so there are 4 priests, 12 huts, 2 offerings, these building tiles, 3 dice, and 2 randomly chosen oops, come on, where are they? God cards, in this case a green and a blue god, and I also explain those god cards, I think, when I need that. I think it doesn't really make sense to explain that to you at this point in time. And of course there is his god token as well. And one thing, he's going second. So what does it mean to go first and to go second? This is more or less only really important for the first turn, as most of these Euro-style games. So in this case, the status track, the player who goes first will be on top of that, and the player who goes second and so on will be below that. That's a pretty same mechanism as in Castles of Burgundy, but here there is a slight change to that. As the starting player starts here at 0 on the scoring track, whereas each player who let's say goes after the starting player gains 1 or 2 or 3 starting victory points. So this is more or less a small benefit for not going first. And additionally, the player who does not go first can select the hut first on this island, and I think this is something we will do now right away. So as the red player is the first starting player, the green player can choose first where to put his first hut. and I think we will go for this wood tile. There is one restriction when placing your first hut. You're only allowed to place that beside a fish space here where it shows the number 1. So for example here or here, and then you can place it there, and therefore when placing your hut there you can directly gain the resource that's being shown on this building spot here. In this case this would be 1 wood token. So let's place the wood to the appropriate space of the ceremony space, and of course you have to put that where it's shown here, and these are being used for these building tiles later on in action, but I come to that when, I think in the next episode I will show you how this is going to work. The red player chooses this area here where also beside 1 fish here, and this would allow him to gain 1 sand into his ceremony space. So let's take 1 sand, and I think I will place it here very quite centrally, so then we can later on either build a building on these 2 tiles or on these 2 tiles here. So last but not least we have to reveal the top first 5 cards of the God cards, and these are more or less the open offerings that are available for the appropriate action. So this and that, and there's also a white one, and the rest stays where it is for later usage. So how does the game actually works? I will make it brief. In general, of course, it's a Euro style game, so it's all about victory points. So much is clear. This game consists of 6 rounds basically, and these 6 rounds are represented by these 6 rows here. So this is a round, this is a round, this is a round, this is a round, and so on. I think you get the point here. And each round consists of 3 phases. In the first phase, each player rolls his 3 dice, so just like that. And of course the same will be done by the, let's say, just simulate that, will be done by the second player. And these dice can then be used for the appropriate action tiles. I show that to you in a second. In the next phase you can activate these workers basically, so there are man and woman tiles that you might acquire throughout the game, and then you can use one of a kind. For example, you can use the right side of this man tile to gain another man tile from the offering on the right side of the board, so basically here. And you can do that for man and for your woman tiles. And I was already wrong, of course, these are the woman tiles. Sorry, my bad. The man tiles are these light blue tiles here, and they are also more or less offer you an action to the right. So in phase B you can use 1 type of a man tile and 1 of a kind of a woman tile. That's more or less it. Then there is this phase C, and there are 4 different actions you have to do. Basically, they're reflected on the right side of the game board. So there is this status track, the temple, then the jewelry, and last but not least, the fulfillment of these task tiles here that you have on your player board. After these 3 phases, everything will be more or less restocked. For example, you gain new task tiles here in the offering, then you gain new man tiles and woman tiles, and replace them with 6 new for each game round. The status track here shows you for once the amount of victory points you gain when you advance on the status track, and of course also the player order more or less. So whoever is on top or to the top right position, most right position, will start the next game round. The temple provides you, dependent of the amount of priests you have there, some victory points for once, and the player who has the most priests in the temple gains one of these god tiles here, who will for once serve as some kind of a wild card when playing god cards, or also count at the end of the game for victory points. So there's 2 victory points for each god tiles that you haven't used. In this phase of the jewelry, you can select one of these jewelry tiles here on the left, pay the appropriate prices. For example, here you have to pay 2 shells to get that, and then you can take that to your private for your player board, and they also gain you some victory points at the end of the game, depending of the more or less on the amount of jewelry, and maybe also some if you have pairs and stuff like that. And they also help you in resolving the task tiles. At the end of each game round, a player must fulfill one task tile, and that's exactly one task tile that needs to be fulfilled. And then you check your task tiles on your personal player board. For example, this task tile here, when you want to fulfill that, you then would have to show 2 of these jewelry that you might have collected. When you have resolved your task tile, then you would be allowed to gain a new task tile. Though it's basically not allowed, you have to draw a new task tile, and this will be done by the new starting player. In case you couldn't fulfill one or either one of those task tiles, then you would need to decide on which task tile you would need to discard. Then you don't gain any bonuses for that. So normally for each task tile you are about to resolve, you gain 6 victory points, and there is also a possibility to use a yellow guard card basically, so something like this. If you use this one, this will make it a little bit easier for you for once, but it would also subtract 2 victory points. Let me show you 2 victory points for that. So if you use that yellow guard, you only gain 4 victory points for that card. Each task tile you have completed successfully will be put here on this spot here, face down basically. Then you would draw or choose a new task tile here, place it here, and also these task tiles may give you some additional victory points at the end of the game. Now let me show you what special action cards that are available for this 2-player game. Remember, for a 3-player game there would be 6 action cards, and for a 4-player game all 7 of these action cards would lay out. Let me quickly explain you how the usage of these cards or tiles are about to work. So basically these tiles can be used by any number of players more or less simultaneously. So for example, the first player would take one of his dice, let's say it would be the red player here, and would place this number here, and then he would be allowed to perform this special building action. Then the next player, let's say the green player, could also place another building action there, but there is one limitation to that. Of course, he could place any die there, but this die has to show a lower value than any die that's on the board. In this case, a 4, 3, 2 or 1 could be placed, for example, like this. And if now another player would go for the same building action, then he would only be allowed to place a die with a number 2 or 1 on this tile. There are gods like this blue god who will more or less allow you, when you play this out, then you would be allowed to also place die on the same card that has the same or even some of these higher values. So in this case the green player could also go for the number 6. I think this will come clearer when I explain that to you in the gaming session. Now let me explain you quickly what this building action here really does. So for example, the red player places some die here, for example this number 4 die. Then he would be allowed to take this building tile here. Lower values would also be fine. So with this number 4 he placed on this tile, he could go for 4, 3, 2 and 1. And then he would be allowed to place this building tile onto his ceremony space here, but only on fields where he has 2 resources adjacent to that. So in this case, of course, as you can see, he only has 1 resource there, so he would not be allowed to perform that action. But just for this example, let's just say he had these 2 resources in play, then he would be allowed to place this hut or this building tile basically here. These resources go back to the store, and then he would be allowed to gain some victory points. That's depending on when you are about to build these tiles here basically. So in round 1 and 2 you gain 10 victory points, and round 3 and 4 7 victory points, and so on, and you gain this special fire bonus as well. There's also a way to gain some victory points when all of these spaces at the game end are occupied, and there it doesn't matter if it's these building tiles or if these are resources. As long as all the fields are somehow equipped, you gain a special bonus by the end of the game. The next tile is the so-called helper action, and this helper action can be used in many different ways. So you would also place a die here, for example this 5, and then you can check your player board on how to use that. Here it's important the amount of die you are actually placed on this action card. So in this case we placed the 5 here, of course that's the green die, but that doesn't matter. And these 3 things can be done for one number of the die. So for example you could go for 5 tethering actions, or 5 shell collection actions, or 5 victory points one by one. The actions down here at the helper actions have to be traded in for 2 die points per action. For example, if you want to move your hut, for example, or if you want to collect a wood, stone or sand here, then you would have to trade in 2 die result points here. For example, let's go for some wood here, so this would cost us 2, because they're 2 to 1, so this would allow us to gain 1 wood. Then we could go for example 1 victory points on the victory track, so then we would be down to 2, and the remaining 2 actions could be used, for example, to draw another god card. This is the man or woman action in a I think it's also in the 3-player game as well. Then you would have different 2 cards for that. So 1 tile for man and 1 tile for woman, but it's also more or less the same. So you would place a die here, and then you would be allowed to select either a man or a woman from the offering at the bottom of the board. In this example we placed the die with the number 4, so we would be allowed to go for this or that tile here, but also let's say men and women below that number, so also 3, 2 and 1 would also suffice. So we would be allowed to grab, for example, this man tile here and place it on an empty space of our player board. Here, remember, we are not allowed to put a man tile on this hut as long as this is not either on the island or at our let's say parking position for the huts. So this field here would allow us, for example, to place huts from down here to there, so this would free up this space for placing later on workers. There is no limit on this field, so keep that in mind. But as well, we are not getting any bonuses for placing these huts on the field. This is the expand action, and also for the 2-player game this is more or less an either or card, so you could go for a waterway or for a landway or for a road basically. So you would be allowed to place this die on this action tile here, and then you would be allowed to use either the road with a matching number. So in this case we place the number, let me show that to you, the number 5 here. So we would be allowed to take this route, so we could then get one of our huts from our player board and place it in this area. We could also go in this direction because it's a 2, so lower values are always fine, so we could place it here, or we could also go down here to the side, to the south. Let me show that to you, where I could go here as well. So diagonal movement is not allowed in this case. When placing a new hut or when expanding basically on this spot here, for example, then I would be allowed to gain that resource instantly, and as well I could use a red god card and could score these fishing grounds here. And that's the only way or the only time when I could do that. So I could not decide later on in a later turn to count these fish here. That's no way. The last action would be the temple action, and would also place a die here, and then I would be allowed to place one priest from my player board to the appropriate field on the temple. So here it shows the number 2, so I would be allowed to place my priest here. In this case also lower values would always suffice, but it's more or less recommended to not start too early, too far downside here, because you could be pushed out of the temple in a later phase of the game. And also in a temple action, so when placing your priests here, you would be allowed this special bonus, this fire bonus, but I think this is really something I explained to you when we are about to do that. It's not really difficult, so you can claim God card or offering or whatever, but I explain you that when it is so far. So these were basically the main actions. They are always, let's say, the phase B, where you can activate those women tiles or man tiles later on, but I think I will explain those as they come, but in principle they are more or less the same as the action card. For example, this one here would allow me to draw another man from the offering. So this was basically my introduction video with a very brief rule explanation. There are many more details you have to keep in mind, but I think it really does not make sense to go into too much detail at this point in time. I think I will explain all the rules when we come to that situation, and I think this will keep the gameplay more smoothing and more interesting. So I think maybe the first session might be a bit longer because I need to explain a little bit more, but then again the later turns everything will get clearer for you, and then I think the gameplay will advance a little bit faster from there on. So I hope you enjoyed it. I hope to see you soon in then my first playthrough video, when I really will actually starting playing this cool game. Really, I tested that now, and I can really only say I'm very looking forward to that, to do this playthrough here for you. Hope you enjoyed as well, and hope to see you soon. Until then, bye bye.